Hey guys, Stealth here and welcome to Avorion. In this tutorial we're going to look at carrier operations. How do you build one, what can you do with them, why are they useful, and how do you build your own fighters. It's going to be a relatively longer tutorial than what I try to do for this game, because what I aim to do with my tutorials is show you how you can do stuff and then leave it to your imagination to actually implement it for your own ships and your own designs. What I have over here is a small ship that I have built as a specific carrier for this tutorial. It doesn't look like much, but it has what I need. Now this ship is drawn up out of Xanian, but in order to go for carriers you don't really need Xanian. Trinium is what you need. Because from Trinium onwards you can build hangars. In Neonite, Titanium and Iron you just don't have that. So it's going to take a little bit of time before you actually get to the fighter tier. The first thing you're going to need is a hangar, and it doesn't really matter if you build it out of Trinium or out of Xanian. Xanian gives you, I believe, a bit more hit points, but, well, at this point you're going to have shield generators, and if something actually attacks your hull, then something else has gone on terribly wrong. So let's go for Trinium. I have a couple of slots reserved in this ship specifically for hangars, and this is one of them. So what I'm going to do is just hold Shift, and click, and now I have a relatively small hangar. On the right here, you can see that I have hangar space use 0 out of 45. I can have 45 small fighters, 13 medium fighters, or 5 large fighters. I can also have an additional space up here. And by doing that, I can have even more. So if I fill up this whole space, then I could probably fit a whole bunch of fighters on here. Now what you can see while I'm building this is that the game is indicating what the flight path, or let's say the attempted flight path, is going to be for these fighters. They're going to try and come in from one side or the other side. And that's the, let's say the red bar protruding forward and that white greenish thing protruding aft. If I were to rotate it or just put it up here, you can see that they can now use either end. The way that I have them set up here on the port and starboard, this one can only go in from the port, and this thing can only go in from the starboard. I kind of like these designs more, but what you could also do is just build a design that has a hangar deck across the whole middle of the ship, so that your fighters can go in from one side or the other. You would end up, however, with the same situation that I have now. My fighters can come in from here or the other side, and it doesn't matter where they land. Now, what I have now is in fact a carrier. The thing is, I don't have any fighters. If you press P, you can now see that the fighter tab, the hangar tab, has been unlocked. I'm going to build a new squad. You can rename this squadron as you see fit. At the moment I'm not going to do it because it's just going to be a tutorial. Now I am already at this equipment dock, and that's exactly where I want to be. I want to dock with this. And I want to trade equipment. Over on this tab, the third tab, you can buy fighters. This is one of the ways that you can get fighters. It's the easiest way to get fighters, in fact. I have a couple of options. I have pulse cannon fighters. I have plasma fighters that I can buy. I can buy very expensive Tesla fighters, which have quite a bit of DPS. And they do a lot more damage to shields. So if I'm going to go for a carrier which needs to be taking down shields quickly, then Tesla fighters would be interesting. I can also have a couple of fighters in a repair wing. These ships will repair both hull and... sorry, no, not shields. These will just repair hull. You can have quite a lot of these squadrons on your ship. So in case that you want to have a couple of repair fighters, you can have, let's say, 2 or 3 of these in a separate wing, and that is just your repair wing. The same thing goes for offensive fighters. You can have a flight of Tesla fighters, plasma fighters, pulse cannon fighters, depending on the type of threat and depending on the type of weaponry that you want. When the fight is over, having a couple of salvaging fighters is really, really helpful. Because what these guys allow you to do is immediately break up the ship that you have just demolished into even smaller bits and use that as materials that you use to build further fighters. Because that's something that carriers can also do. I also have access to chain gun fighters and lightning fighters, but I don't find those to be terribly interesting. Now what I'm going to do is, let's say, just buy a couple of plasma fighters. The game won't allow you to do this if you do not have a specific hangar wing set up. So if you don't have a wing set up, then the game doesn't know where to add them. Now I have my 2 plasma fighters. what I can do now is hold shift, move my cursor over to the left, and I have my new squadron over here. These fighters can do three different things. I can attack, I can defend, or I can withdraw. I can return the fighters to the bay. If I tell them to defend, they will try to move out of the bay, but there is a problem. It says we don't have any pilots. So whenever you're building a carrier, make sure you have pilots aboard, otherwise you won't be able to use these guys. So let's hire a bunch of pilots, and that should allow these guys to actually start moving. So if I hit these guys again with defend, now you can see that my fighters, this one over here, and there's another one doing loops somewhere else. Yeah, it's over there. So one here, one there. If you ever lose track of where they are, hold shift and mouse over the wing that you're looking for, and the game will put a little bracket around the ships that you're trying to follow. So let's bring these guys back on board. Sometimes they're a little shifty in how they land. They're not always as elegant with the landing. And especially being still really helps when you're trying to retrieve your fighters. Alright, so that's one. Let's buy a couple of repair fighters. So trade equipment, get more fighters, and just get a couple of repair fighters. There is one problem with this. These repair fighters are now part of the wing that is originally designed with the plasma fighters in mind. So I'm going to build a new squadron. I'm going to rename this as Repair. And you can call all sorts of fancy names in here, of course. And then I can drag these guys over. So I can tell a repair fighter to move here and a repair fighter to move there. And the game automatically says, hey, this is a repair fighter squad. This is an armed fighter squad. So these guys can actually fight. If I now have a look at the repair squadron, I can tell them to repair, or return, or collect lost fighters. All of them have this, and this is useful if you have, I believe, a ship destroyed that used to have fighters on it, or if you have accidentally left your fighters behind in a different squad, or in a different sector, because, well, maybe you had to jump out in a hurry. Currently the ship's not damaged, so I don't need my repair fighters. Let's say I want to build more repair fighters. In order to do that, I first need to tell the game I want to build more fighters. And you can do that by having a fighter, let's say a repair fighter, and you drag that over to this box. When you do that, the game is going to tell you that this will destroy the fighter and turn it into a blueprint. So what happens on your ship is pretty much that they take the fighter apart, look at what's on the inside, and then they figure out, okay, so that's how I'm going to build this thing. It will also remove the previous blueprint if there is none. If there is one. So if you already had a blueprint over here and you drag another one over it, it's going to remove that blueprint and replace it with a new one. In this case, I want to build a repair fighter. Now the game gives you the information and says, if you want to build one of this, it's going to take you trinium, and beyond that, you can see what the specs of the fighter are. Unfortunately, I cannot produce. Production is disabled. The production is disabled because I don't have any assembly bays on the ship. So what a carrier needs is a factory of sorts. The bigger the factory, the more capable of producing these things quickly. Now, as opposed to the hangars, there is an advantage, at least in the current version of the game, with building bigger assembly blocks. If I were to build a trinium assembly block, by the way, if you're just getting trinium, you can also draw these up just out of iron or titanium. I, however, wouldn't recommend it, because iron is quite heavy. Titanium doesn't build that quickly. Neonite, trinium, xanium, that's where it's at. So I'm going to build a assembly block here. What this assembly block allows me to do is build pretty quick, and on the bottom right hand side it's going to say I can build 3 simultaneous productions. So I can have 3 things being produced at the same time, but there's a drawback. This does not mean that I can build 3 fighters at the same time of the same wing. So it's not like I'm going to enable production here and the game is automatically going to shit out 3 new fighters. That doesn't work. This allows me to, for 12,322 trinium, build a new fighter. It's going to take me a long time though, 37 minutes and 49 seconds. And this is real time. So it's going to take you a long time to get these things built. What I'm going to do now is upgrade this to Xanian. So click the Xanian assembly, hold Alt and transform it. And now the time is going to tick back quite a bit. Now it's dropped from 37 to 25 minutes. So now it's a hell of a lot faster. 12,322 trinium price has remained the same. If I then tick this, it's going to enable the build, and this will now start producing. I cannot yet do that for the plasma wing fighter, or the plasma fighter wing, because I don't have the blueprint set. What happens if I do that is that the game is going to try to produce these things at the same time. Now these are let's call it less production intensive to build. You can see the productive effort down below in the thumbnail for this thing. It says prod effort, 5.20 or 525.81k, whereas these guys cost 806k to build. So let's say they're more complex fighters. Alright, so that's going to take a bit of time. However, I'm not trying to build two at the same time, which is going to mean that these take a lot more time, because the production block, the assembly block, is trying to split it out between both the repair fighter wing and the fighter wing. So it's going to take, well, double the time for both of them. This one used to be 16 minutes, this is used to be 25 minutes. It's now going to take double the time. This is one way of getting fighters, but there is another way. You can also build your own, and that's something that I really love about Avorion. What I'm going to do is trade equipment with the equipment dock. I'm going to have a look at what sort of turrets they have. They have a double Zanian mining turret available, and this is actually something that I really would like to get. There's only one, but that is enough. So I'm going to build, or I'm going to buy, a double Zanian mining turret. Next up, in this sector, I'm going to fly to the fighter factory, which is over there. So let's boost our way there. The fighter factory allows you to build your own fighters. And this is very handy because it allows you to set up what specific type of weaponry or salvage miners, or salvage arrays, or even mining arrays you want on your ship. Rather, on your fighter. In my game, I have at least one carrier who's just set up as a salvaging carrier. And I have another one which is just set up as a mining carrier. I think it unleashes 30 to 40 mining fighters. And that's something that I want to build with this ship as well. So let's try to come into the dock here. As you can see, this ship is not the most maneuverable. I threw it together quickly for the tutorial, but it struggles a bit to maneuver around. There we go. Oh, tractor beam. Thank you. Right, so I'm now at the fighter factory. I can now build fighters. The fighters require a couple of different things. They require a blueprint that you can use on the left, and these can even be ships that you have designed yourself. So in case with this ship, what I can do is go into the build, and I can say I want to save this design. For that, click on Saved Designs, and I can then save the current design. I'm going to do that, and that allows me to actually use this design as a fighter. Yes, it's a bit weird, but it does work. Here's my ship, the Nimitz, as I've called it. That's what it looks like now. Having a fighter with a hangar bay on it doesn't really do much, but it is a way that you can use your own ship designs and actually turn them into craft and into fighters. In this case, I have already found a much better design of the workshop, which is the SEF MF1. I really love the design of this one. It gives me a bit of a fighter feel, and that's much better than what I have. The next thing I'm going to do is add this turret onto it, the double Zanian mining turret. Then you can just click create if you don't want to adjust anything, but I do want to adjust some things. I want to make sure that these things are smaller, because the smaller they are, the more you can have on your aircraft carrier. So let's invest a few of these remaining points into the size by hitting the plus. And I want them to be a little faster. Let's say around 400. And then maneuverability. Durability for mining fighters I don't really care about, because they won't be sent out in firefights anyway. So the durability I don't need to invest in. What I can do is just put a couple more points in here. Make it really quick. 600. And then... oh, that's all my points gone. This does blossom the price from the original 60-65 that it was to 500,000. So keep in mind they're now a bunch more expensive. Create. Alright, I now have my new fighter on my craft. Here it is, a mining fighter. These things take 540,000 to actually get produced. So again, make sure you have a bigger assembly block and it's going to speed up production significantly. Unfortunately, this is now a sort of a mixed squad. The game doesn't know what sort of squad it is. This is the original plasma fighter wing, was it? Yeah, plasma fighter. So I'm going to call this the plasma fighter wing. I'm going to set up a new squadron. And I'm going to drag this mining fighter over here. I don't want it to set up as an actual fighting wing yet. And I don't want to send it out as a blueprint. Because then I cannot demonstrate what it does. This is the mining wing. And although the current ship does not have a mining system installed, if I can find some asteroids, I can still show you what the mining fighters actually do. There's the asteroids. Of course, keep in mind that mining fighters are great, but can only mine +1 tier of material above the tier that they're built up themselves. So in case of the Zanian, I can build Ogonite, or I can mine Ogonite, but I cannot mine Avorion with those fighters. That's the limiting factor. Alright, let's see if there's any shiny rock around. Because I'm just doing this by eye since I don't have a mining equipment. There we go, this looks like trinium. I can now send out this fighter, the mining fighter, and tell it to start harvesting. I lost one pilot, and there we go. The guy is now trying to break up this rock. It's gonna take a bit of time if you just use one mining fighter. Over time, it's gonna go a bit faster, of course, if you have more of these things. But you can see that it is trying to break it up. And over here on the bottom right-hand side, you can see that I'm very slowly mining some trinium. Although this is not the only trinium miner that I have on hand at the moment. Well, let's say on staff. I have more of these guys operational. What I'm going to do now is head over to a different craft to show you what sort of wings you can have. This is the Defiant. This is my my biggest ship at the moment. Where is she? Here she is. Alright, this is Defiant. The Defiant has a lot more fighter wings. I have a couple of Rocketeers. These are launcher fighters. I have pulse cannon fighters, I have salvagers, I have a second wing of salvagers, and I have improved salvagers. What I do with this ship is do the main combat. And once ships have been destroyed, using the armament of the carrier, or let's say the ship itself, then I send out my fighters. So then I tell my salvagers to go actually mine the stuff that I have just destroyed. These were the original ships that I used for that, the R salvaging fighter. They do turn it into scrap that you then have to refine. So keep that in mind. If you're going to use these, you need a cargo bay. So with the other ship that I just showed you, the Nimitz class carrier, it doesn't work. I don't have a cargo bay. Then I upgraded to these, the R salvaging fighters with 182 DPS. That is 3 times over what I have with these things. And then again, the productive effort on these is only 85,000. Over here, it is 4.4 million. That's how long these ships take to build, because they are so much better at their job. This is pretty much all that there is to aircraft carriers. Make sure you have a hangar. On this ship, I have it on the side, for example, but you could just as easily have it on the top. Make sure you have a production block. The bigger the production block, or the assembly block, the more you're going to produce. Let's see, do I have one? Yeah, over here I have a big assembly block on the stern of the ship. And I think this is just one of the assembly blocks, because I believe I have more of them. These are very useful, but also take up quite a bit of power, and they require mechanics to use. So keep in mind that if you're going to go with assembly blocks, you will need mechanics or a bunch of crew. Of course, if you're building ships or if you're building fighters and you want to have one specific ship that is just there to build fighters for you, you can do that. You can just build a ship that has, for example, a massive assembly block on it, provided you can afford it. In this case, I can't, but this would massively speed up production. Let's say my current speed of production for these things is 8 minutes. So in 8 minutes, I can spit out something that takes a productive effort of 4.4 million. That means that these are done in 60 seconds or less. Same here. This is 8 minutes and this is 2 minutes. If I add, let's say, a big block here. I don't have that much cash on hand, unfortunately. So originally it was, what, 8 minutes? Yeah, 8 minutes 16. Add another assembly block. And now it's dropped to 4 minutes 29. But now I am going to need another 56 mechanics. No, sorry, a bit more. Anyway, summary, build a hangar, build your assembly block, either get fighters from an equipment dock, like the one that I have over here. You do that by trading equipment, getting your fighter, and the game is going to check if you have a fighter wing available. If you do, it's going to put that fighter in that fighter wing. If it doesn't, it's going to tell you, hey, you need to create a fighter wing first, otherwise it doesn't work. Then, once you have your fighter wing, bring pilots. Without pilots, the aircraft don't do anything. Once you have everything set up properly, you're going to see these things on the left-hand side. I would recommend renaming them, because otherwise you might find it confusing about what's what. Aircraft carriers can get very, very expensive to run, in the sense that they are material hogs. Oh, well, there goes my carrier, apparently. That was the test ship, or the tutorial ship. She's already been destroyed by a bunch of pirates. Anyway, as I was saying, these things can turn into production hogs. They take up a lot of resources. This one salvaging fighter takes 21,000 Zanian to build. Now I have 1.7 million because I have a bunch of fighters miners running around. But when you're just starting out, don't try to go for the most expensive design. Just go for some cheap fighters, easy stuff, and see what works for you. That way you have a pretty easy way of just getting around to aircraft carriers, seeing what works, seeing what you like, seeing how they can do their job for you, and what sort of fighter you might want to build. Once you're up to building your own fighter, you can go again to the equipment dock, and you can buy your equipment. So you can buy a turret, and you can then use that turret as a setup for your fighter. The more expensive the turret, the more expensive the fighter. What also works is if you have them available, and I don't have them in this sector, but I'm sure they are pretty close. Turret factories. Turret factories allow you to build your own turrets, which you can then put onto your custom fighters. So what you can do, and that's what I did with my expensive salvaging wing, I built a really expensive salvaging equipment, a salvaging turret. I put that on my fighter, and then I started building that fighter on my carrier. And that's how I can defeat ships, quickly salvage them, and use the materials that I salvaged to build yet more fighters. That's how it works. It's a sort of self-feeding ship. Anyway, that's the tutorial for the fighters and the aircraft carriers. If you have any questions, let me know down below. And aside from that, I'm very curious to see what you have come up with. If I missed anything, if you have any additions, then things that you think should be in this tutorial, let me know down in the comments below as well. And if I agree, I'll make sure to pin the comment so you can see what sort of stuff should have potentially been included, or how the game might have evolved after this tutorial has been released. Anyway, that's all. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this useful. Have fun with your carriers and have fun playing Avorion.